So after 12 months, the Canon EOS R is finally starting to resemble a full professional system with the RF 15-35mm and the RF 24-70mm f2.8L lenses. The question is, after all that waiting, do they hold up performance-wise? And I think the answer is yes, they do. I've taken both lenses for a pretty significant test drive, both in terms of video and in terms of stills. There's another video on my channel, which is the Polaroid Lab review, with the link here somewhere. And that was shot entirely on these two lenses. So watch that review and you'll get a feel for how it performs in a pure video sense. They held up very, very well in those live testing conditions. I've also shot some stills with them out in the pouring rain, just doing some street photography. But I have to say that both lenses performed excellently. The 15-35 I was particularly impressed with because it's not a focal length I particularly use. I don't use it in terms of architectural landscape at all. For me, it's purely a practical lens in terms of getting wide angle shots for video or for group shots. So, you know, literally event kind of photography where you need to get back and you can't get back far enough in a room and there's too many people, so you need to shoot super wide. And the distortion is incredibly well controlled. Even shooting at the wide end of 15mm, distortion, unless you're shooting brick walls, is almost imperceptible. And even if you are shooting brick walls, the distortion is not that pronounced. It is there, it does exist, but it's not obtrusive, it's not destructive by any means, and you really will only notice it if you pixel peep or if you're shooting very straight parallel lines. Taken into the lab, it did perform slightly below par in terms of resolution around the edges, which for lenses this price, that is a bit of a kick in the balls, because when you're spending, you know, $2,500, $3,000, whatever these cost on a lens, you hold them to a higher standard. So whereas if this was a £1,500 lens, you might just say, well, you know, the distortion is fine, it's not a problem. When they do come in at a slightly elevated price point, you do have to be more critical of them. But I think that is more a reflection of the price than the performance, if that's something I can say. I think the lenses are fantastic, and it's nothing that a tiny bit of correction in Photoshop won't correct in terms of the distortion. Again, for my purposes, because I mainly shoot portraiture and video, softness or lack of sharpness, I should say, around the edges of the frame isn't a deal breaker for me. If you are an architectural or landscape shooter, it might be a deal breaker for you, but for my purposes, these were both fantastic. I should say in video terms especially, the RF 2470 does not exhibit breathing. It suppresses focus breathing, so when you're zooming in and zooming out, pushing in and pushing out, you don't get the shift in focus, which is a big plus for a video lens or lenses that are going to be used for video. And the USM, the nano USM technology in these lenses is fantastic for video. I have to say that I'm actually more impressed with these lenses in terms of video, because for shooting photographically, I don't like zooms. I'm a prime lens sort of person, so I tend not to use them. But having said that, of course, photographically, these do perform exceptionally well. Center sharpness, both lenses is superb. Again, the 2470 does suffer, as the 15-35 does, a little bit of lack of sharpness around the edges. Distortion isn't too bad. I mean, they both perform excellently, unless you really are pixel peeping, which I suppose is the job of people like me, is to do that sort of stuff. But really, I mean, for most people who use these lenses, if you are a wedding photographer, a portrait photographer who's going to use a 2470 lens, someone who's shooting events, you're not really going to notice the shortcomings that these lenses possess. You will notice them if you are a landscape or an architectural shooter, in which case it may be a case of more, you might need to grab one of these yourselves and take it for a test drive to see how that affects your work. In terms of how they compare to their EF lens counterparts, the 15-35 is obviously a little bit wider at 15mm, so it gives you that extra scope to your images, which I think is very valuable. They both have stabilization, which is so important because the EOS R and the EOS RP are not stabilized. So to have the in-lens stabilization is incredibly valuable, and stabilization isn't quite as necessary, or the lack of stabilization isn't as pronounced when you're shooting at 15mm, but certainly between 24 and 70, having the image stabilization is invaluable, so important to have when the camera doesn't have image stabilization. It just enables you to shoot with slower shutter speeds, to be able to shoot handheld at a longer focal length. It gives you the reassurance, gives you the stability that you truly notice when you go back and shoot with the EF version of this lens, the EF 2470. you do notice that slight wobble and camera shake. The fact that both these lenses have the control rings is a massive plus. For video purposes, it's a bit of a shame that they aren't clickless, although you can take them to a Canon service center and have them declicked. That said, if you are shooting in a video setting, and this is something I did myself, to make small adjustments, you just have to turn the ring delicately and it doesn't make that much sound. There is a risk of some vibration when obviously there's a physical click, not just an audible click, so there is a risk of that. Build quality is good. They're obviously both, they're L lenses, so they're weather sealed, and I put that to the test because I was out shooting in some horrendous rain on my last evening, testing out these lenses to get some sample images. It was pissing down, and I managed to get some some interesting shots while being completely soaked by the British autumn weather. Focusing is fast, focusing is accurate. Obviously using this with the dual pixel autofocus on the EOS R is a dream, especially for shooting video. I've just been really blown away by how well they perform in a video setting, and as I say, photographically I don't like using zoom lenses, so although I was impressed with their abilities to take stills, I'm actually quite coveting both lenses to shoot more video with. The EOS R system, the RF mount system, is underserved for wide-angle lenses in particular. So the widest you can get, apart from the 15 to 35, is the 35mm f1.8 macro lens, which is a great lens. I'm using that right now to film this, but when you shoot at 4K, and the EOS R has got that horrible 1.6 crop, it pushes in that much further. So then you're left using EFS lenses like the 10 to 18mm, what is that? 4.5 to 5.6. So when this is the alternative in terms of video lenses for general purpose vlogging kind of shooting, they are totally different lenses, particularly in terms of price. This is going to set you back a couple of $100. That's going to send you back a couple of thousand. So they are different lenses, they do different things, but point being, that's been my primary video lens along with the 35mm 1.8, and I would love to have the 15-35 as my everyday video lens. All in all, I think the lenses are both fantastic. I think they are the lenses that people have been waiting for, whether you're an enthusiast or a professional. You've been waiting for the 2.8L lenses. You've been waiting for the full trinity. So we've got the 15-35, got the 24-70. Now we just need the 70-200, which Canon promises will be here by the end of the year. And if that's as good as these guys, then the EOS R system is laughing. It really is, because as maligned as the EOS R itself has been, you can't knock how fast Canon has matured the RF lens roadmap. I mean, we've now got 2 of the 3 Trinity lenses. We've got a bunch of fantastic primes. I've got a review of the 85mm f1.2L lens, which is one of my favorite lenses to use. I wish it wasn't so expensive because I would love to have that in my everyday kit bag. But I think the real strength of the EOS R isn't the camera, it's the glass, which is true of any great system, I think. And as and when Canon gets around to releasing a more suitable version of the EOS R with image stabilization and 2-card slots and all the other stuff, we're going to have a killer full-frame mirrorless camera system. If you've yet to invest in the EOS R system, I think these are both incredibly good reasons to move across, to embrace the system. I think if you have taken the plunge and you are an EOS R or an EOS RP owner, save up your pennies, ask Father Christmas, ask Santa Claus for one of these or both of these if you've been a really good boy or girl this year. These are just incredible pieces of glass. I think anybody who buys these would be incredibly pleased with their purchase. These get hearty recommendations, even if you've got to sell a couple of kidneys to afford them.